much for that, Jessica, for that report. Joining us now to discuss all of this, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee. He was asking questions yesterday. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
So what did you think of that your committee accomplished yesterday? What was the main point that you learned?
Look, I think two of the cream of our diplomatic corps in a clear, convincing, and credible way began to tell the story to the American people how the President of the United States helped create a shadow foreign policy for his own political benefit, contrary to the long-standing U.S. foreign policy in Ukraine.
Let me play this clip from Ambassador Bill Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, from his testimony yesterday. Listen to this.
Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. What was your reaction to that, Congressman?
Look, it's shocking, but in another sense, not surprising. I think you can read the president's transcript of his call that the White House released. The fact that he ordered OMB to withhold military aid tells us enough. No matter what the circumstances are in Ukraine, you don't imperil an ally. You don't threaten their national security and therefore our national security by threatening to withhold aid. Aid, frankly, I don't think would have gotten there if it wasn't for the whistleblower and the fact that Congress called the president on it.
The aide the political counselor, the political affairs counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, who overheard this conversation between the president and the U.S. ambassador to the EU, he's going to be appearing behind closed doors tomorrow before your committee. What do you hope to learn from this individual, David Holmes, a senior State Department official?
Look, there's a lot of details there, and the nuance is going to matter, the circumstances, obviously exactly what he heard. And it also makes Ambassador Sondland's testimony next week all the more interesting and intriguing. My message to the ambassador is it's never too late to do the right thing. He's already amended his testimony once. It'll be interesting how he does that again next week, given yesterday's revelation.
Congressman, you got a lot of pushback, a lot of feedback from what you said yesterday about the value of so-called hearsay evidence. This is what you said. I'll play the clip.
I think the American public needs to be reminded that countless people have been convicted on hearsay because the courts have routinely allowed and created needed exceptions to hearsay. Hearsay can be much better evidence than direct, as we have learned in painful instances, and it's certainly valid in this instance.
Well, gentlemen.
All right, so among others, Donald Trump Jr. was tweeting this morning saying, basically, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. I want you to explain your point. Why is hearsay evidence better than direct evidence?
Well, first, I'm sure Don's done a lot of trials in his life. I've done probably over 200, so I might know what I'm talking about. The first message is this. If you don't like the testimony, if you don't like the evidence, quit blocking what everyone might imagine would be much more direct evidence. Mick Mulvaney, blocked. John Bolton, blocked. Rick Perry, their testimony's blocked. So don't complain that the evidence isn't direct enough when you're blocking what would obviously be more direct evidence. As far as the rules of evidence, they're not going to apply in proceedings like this, but the federal rules of evidence, which I'm sure Don knows so much about, create 23 exceptions to the hearsay rule. So obviously the courts understand just how credible it is. In the final analysis, it's how credible it is. Yesterday's testimony, often secondhand, was as credible as it comes. We know from experience in criminal courts that sometimes direct evidence, something like an eyewitness testimony, can be extraordinarily faulty. But we also know that what we might think of as hearsay, indirect evidence, the exceptions might be an excited utterance or a statement against the interest. We've learned from time and time again just how credible it can be. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but one can be better than the other. It depends on the circumstances, and I'm sure Don, with all his lengthy trial experience, can tell us all about it later on.
All right, Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.